and ongoing excavation has revealed so much more about this.
Beneath the rolling green fields of Scotland, something extraordinary was waiting. Archaeologists never expected what they uncovered. A discovery so vast, so unexpected that it is forcing experts, including Graham Hancock, to completely rethink Scotland's earliest history. They are incredibly rare. They are hen's teeth, and they are even more rare in an archaeological context. At first glance, it seemed like just another dig, another routine investigation before construction. But what they found has left even the most seasoned researchers speechless. Let's dig in. Digging into the ordinary. How a school pitch became an archaeological time machine. Sometimes history doesn't reveal itself on windswept cliffs or beneath ancient ruins. Sometimes it hides beneath the most ordinary of places, like a school sports field. In the small town of Carnouie on the eastern coast of Scotland, a plan to build new playing fields at Carnoustie High School became the unlikely spark for one of the most remarkable archaeological discoveries in the country. What began as a routine development would transform into a journey stretching back over 6,000 years. Like many modern construction projects in the United Kingdom, the work could not simply begin with bulldozers and concrete. Regulations require archaeological assessments whenever land is disturbed, particularly in areas with a history of settlement. This precaution often uncovers little more than fragments of pottery or faint traces of old field boundaries. But on occasion, it reveals something extraordinary. In Carnoustie, that precaution proved to be a gateway into the deep past. The responsibility for this initial survey fell to Guard Archaeology, a professional organization that specializes in excavations tied to development projects. Leading archaeologists and field workers arrived on site expecting routine duties. Survey the soil, record any anomalies, and clear the way for construction. What they found was anything but routine. Archaeological assessments typically begin with non-invasive methods. Teams will examine soil changes, use geophysical survey equipment, and dig small test trenches to identify potential features hidden underground. These are subtle clues. Darker stains in the earth, unusual alignments of stone, or patterns that suggest human activity. At Carnouie, the soil began whispering secrets almost immediately. Even in the earliest trenches, the archaeologists noted unusual discolorations in the ground. These stains were not random. They aligned in a way that hinted at deliberate placement. To seasoned eyes, these were not natural formations, but the remains of post holes, evidence that timber structures once stood where children now played football. For a community accustomed to seeing Carney as a modern town best known for its championship golf course, the idea of a prehistoric settlement beneath the schoolyard was startling. The timing of the discovery only added to the sense of intrigue. The excavation began during the push-to-finish construction before the new school year. Developers had expected a straightforward clearance, but now everything slowed. Archaeology is a meticulous science, and once features are spotted, every inch of ground must be recorded with precision. What was meant to be a routine assessment grew into a full-scale excavation. Members of the local community watched with curiosity as trenches widened and the archaeologists' presence extended week after week. It is not unusual in Scotland for construction to pause while archaeologists do their work. The land here has been occupied for thousands of years, and regulations prioritize preservation. Still, most expected little more than the discovery of an old farmstead or a few artifacts from medieval times. But the soil at Carnouie had a different story to tell. Alongside the unusual post holes, the team uncovered fragments of ancient tools and pottery, clear signs of a human presence stretching back far earlier than medieval history. The deeper they dug, the more it became apparent that this was no minor settlement. Early indications suggested an extraordinary scale and age, one that could change how archaeologists understood the region's prehistory. We've cleaned back the archaeology that we finished off at last season. And we're really starting to see these exciting features popping out now. Preliminary reports circulated quietly among professionals first, noting that what was unfolding in Carney was not the story of a forgotten village or farm. Instead, the evidence hinted at a complex site far older and far larger than the team had expected. To put it simply, the archaeologists had stumbled upon something that could reshape the narrative of early Scotland. And so, what began as the marking out of sports pitches transformed into the first steps toward one of the most significant archaeological discoveries in the country. A discovery that would soon reveal just how monumental the past beneath Karnui really was. Traces in the soil, post holes, pottery, and a story from 6,000 years ago. When people imagine ancient buildings, they think of stone ruins still standing after thousands of years. But for Scotland's earliest farmers, timber was the material of choice. Wood rots, it burns, and it disappears into the earth. Yet, archaeologists can still trace these long-vanished structures by reading subtle signs left in the soil. At Carnoustie, those signs took the form of dark circular stains, the remains of post holes that once anchored massive timbers. To the untrained eye, these marks look unremarkable. They could be dismissed as natural discoloration. But for archaeologists like Warren Bailey of Guard Archaeology, patterns matter. Warren and his team quickly recognized that these marks weren't random. They aligned in straight rows, evenly spaced with pairs of larger impressions, suggesting enormous posts once stood side by side. Such configurations are rarely accidental. They are fingerprints of architecture, evidence that people 6,000 years ago planned and built something of extraordinary scale. Each post hole is more than just a stain. By measuring its diameter and depth, archaeologists can estimate the size of the timber it once held. Some of the holes at Karnui were so wide and so deep that the posts they supported must have been immense. This was not a flimsy shelter or a simple hut. It was something larger, sturdier, and carefully designed. Scattered among these post holes were fragments of pottery. To archaeologists, pottery is one of the most reliable timekeepers of prehistory. Styles change across generations, allowing experts to date sites with remarkable accuracy. At Carnoustie, the pottery included early Neolithic sherds such as carinated vessels, pots with sharply angled shoulders that are among the earliest known in Scotland. Other pieces resembled unstand stileware with its distinctive round bases and incised decorations. These types are associated with the first farming communities around 3,800 to 3,600 BC. The presence of such pottery confirmed two things. First, that the site was firmly rooted in the earliest centuries of Scotland's Neolithic period. And second, that the people here were not isolated. Carinated pottery has strong links to continental traditions, while unstand stileware connects Carnoustie to Orkney and the Northern Isles. In other words, even 6 millennia ago, this community was part of wider networks of exchange and shared culture. As more post holes were mapped, a picture began to emerge. Archaeologists don't simply record their positions, they connect them, reconstructing the layout of buildings as though they were drafting blueprints from long-forgotten plans. Paired post holes often signal doorways, while clusters at regular intervals suggest roof supports. At Karnui, the alignment revealed long straight sides, evenly spaced posts and entrances set opposite each other. This was the outline of a hall and not a modest dwelling either, but a monumental timber building. Inside the soil features, traces of burning were also found, suggesting hearths or cooking areas. Combined with the pottery, this hinted at communal feasting or gatherings. Such halls were not just homes. They were centers of social life. People likely assembled here for rituals, celebrations, or decision-making, turning the structure into the heart of their community. What fascinated the archaeologists most was the length of the emerging plan. As the trenches expanded and more post holes were connected, the outline stretched further and further. This was no short square house. It extended across the site in a way that suggested an immense purpose-built structure, carefully engineered and placed intentionally. By the close of the excavation season, the team could no longer deny what they were seeing. Beneath their feet lay the unmistakable blueprint of a Neolithic timber hall, vast, deliberate, and older than most monuments we associate with prehistoric Britain. For the first time in thousands of years, the shape of this building was visible once again, traced not by stone walls, but by the silent marks of posts long turned to dust. And with those traces, archaeologists realized they were staring at the outline of something remarkable. A very long, purpose-built structure, a timber hall on a scale rarely seen in Scotland's prehistory. How big is big? The architecture and technology of Neolithic halls. Archaeologists are careful about using the word big. In prehistory, size often meant survival. A larger settlement, a sturdier wall, a more imposing monument. These were reflections of power and coordination. When experts from Guard Archaeology pieced together the measurements of the timber hall at Karnui, they realized they were standing before something monumental in every sense of the word. The hall stretched an estimated 115 feet in length and nearly 30 feet across. Broadly comparable to 5 large timber halls that have been excavated in Scotland and dated to the early 4th millennium BC. For the early Neolithic period around 4000 BC, those proportions were astonishing. This wasn't a hut or a modest family dwelling. It was a vast, carefully engineered building, the largest early Neolithic timber hall yet uncovered in Scotland. To put that into perspective, the structure was longer than a modern basketball court and almost as wide as a 3-lane highway. The design details told their own story. Post holes showed that the builders set up massive oak timbers paired side by side to support the roof. Some of the post sockets were so wide and deep that they must have held trunks of impressive thickness. These were towering trees cut, shaped, and hauled into place with nothing more than stone tools and human strength. Each post had to be planted securely to hold the weight of a roof that likely rose high above the ground. A roof designed to shelter dozens, perhaps hundreds of people at once. The walls, archaeologists believe, were made using wattle and daub woven wooden panels plastered with a clay and organic mixture that hardened into a weather-resistant surface. This was advanced building technology for its time, capable of sealing out wind and rain. The hall's entrances, identified by sets of opposing post holes, suggest that people could pass through in a controlled, almost processional manner, entering on one side and exiting on the other. The architecture itself may have shaped how people moved, gathered, and interacted inside the space. Dating the hall was equally revealing. Radiocarbon analysis of organic material from the site placed its construction near 4000 BC. That makes the building roughly 1,000 years older than Stonehenge and several centuries older than the first pyramids in Egypt. When compared against those famous monuments, Carnoustie's Hall might not appear as visually dramatic, but its significance is no less profound. It demonstrates that communities in Scotland were capable of complex large-scale construction at a time when many parts of Europe were still experimenting with farming and settlement. The implications are striking. To create a hall of this size, people needed to organize labor on a massive scale. Someone had to select and fell the oak trees, others to transport and position them, and still others to weave and plaster the walls. The very existence of the building suggests leadership, planning, and cooperation. Qualities often underestimated in descriptions of early farming communities. These were not scattered families eking out survival on the edge of the North Sea. They were organized groups with vision, skill, and the ability to transform the landscape. What was this hall used for? The evidence doesn't provide a simple answer, but its sheer size makes one thing clear. It was designed for gatherings. A single family would never need such a space. Instead, the hall must have drawn in people from across the region, farmers from the surrounding plains, herders from nearby valleys, and perhaps even visitors from coastal communities who arrived by sea. Here, under the roof of oak and clay, they might have shared meals, forged alliances, held ceremonies, or made decisions that shaped the lives of everyone present. The people who built the Karnui Hall likely saw it as more than just a structure. It was a statement. It told anyone who entered that this community had the resources, the skill, and the unity to build on a monumental scale. It told outsiders that this was a place of importance. And for us, thousands of years later, it tells a different story, one of ambition, ingenuity, and a level of social organization far beyond what many assumed possible in early Neolithic Scotland. Big, in this case, wasn't just a matter of measurement. It was a reflection of identity, power, and connection. And as the outline of the Carney Hall came into focus, archaeologists knew they were looking at the center of a world that had gathered people together 6,000 years ago. Beneath the pitch. When the experts finally stepped back and looked at their maps, a breathtaking picture emerged. In fact, what archaeologists just found beneath Scotland will leave you speechless. The scattered post holes, pits, and stains in the soil were no longer random. They formed the unmistakable outline of something monumental. Beneath a school playing field in Carnui, Scotland, they had uncovered the footprint of a giant timber hall, the largest early Neolithic hall ever found in the country. Melanie Johnson of Guard Archaeology, who directed the excavation, explained that the discovery was remarkable in scale and importance, and she wasn't exaggerating. The plan of the structure stretched farther than any previously known in Scotland, a reminder that 6,000 years ago, people here were capable of building on a scale most had never imagined. The evidence spoke for itself and caught even Graham Hancock off guard. Rows of paired post holes traced the walls of the building, while opposing entrances gave it a formal processional layout. Pits filled with domestic waste, fragments of pottery, and traces of cereal grains showed that the hall was more than a place of shelter. It was alive with human activity. At times, fires burned inside, meals were prepared, and gatherings took place that left behind hearth ash and charred remnants of food. The finds were not limited to the hall itself. Scattered around the site, the team uncovered other features, smaller structures, working areas, and deposits that suggested the location was part of a wider complex. Archaeologists recovered finely made stone tools, including arrowheads and polished axes, alongside exotic materials that may have been traded from distant regions. These finds implied long-distance connections, a sign that Carnoustie was not isolated, but plugged into broader Neolithic networks. What surprised many was the quality and variety of the pottery. Among the fragments were sherds from vessels used to cook, serve, and store food. Some were decorated, others plain, but together they suggested large-scale feasting or communal meals. To insiders, these finds pointed to the hall serving as a gathering space, perhaps where entire communities came together at certain times of the year to share harvests, celebrate, and forge bonds. But if you think this is shocking, just listen further. The location itself may not have been an accident. The hall sat on ground with broad views of the surrounding landscape, close to fertile soils and access to water. To the Neolithic builders, this would have been an ideal place to establish a focal point for farming families who were shaping a new way of life in Scotland. The presence of hearths and food remains indicates it was used repeatedly, possibly for generations until its timbers finally rotted or were dismantled. For the archaeologists, the reveal was thrilling and humbling. Timber halls from this period are rare in Scotland, and most are far smaller. To find one of such immense scale beneath an ordinary school pitch was beyond expectation. The discovery suggested that Carnoustie's early farmers had ambitions that matched those of the great builders of Orkney, whose monumental stone circles and temples are better known today. The scale of the hall also reframed what archaeologists thought they knew about Scotland's early Neolithic. It showed that monumental architecture was not confined to stone or to the islands in the north. Here on the Angus coast, people had raised a vast timber structure that stood as a statement of community and identity. Its outline, preserved only in the soil, was enough to convey its significance. When the news reached beyond the excavation team, it quickly made headlines. What had started as a plan to build sports pitches was now the site of one of Scotland's most important prehistoric discoveries. And for those who walked across the grounds of Carnoustie High School, it became impossible not to imagine the ghostly outline of that great hall rising once again, its oak posts stretching skyward, filled with the voices and footsteps of the first Scots who gathered beneath its roof. Ripples through time. What this means for Scottish prehistory. Discoveries like the one at Carnouie now ripple outward, reshaping how archaeologists understand entire regions. The hall beneath the school pitch was more than a building. It was a statement of community, of networks, and of ambition. And its implications reached deep into the story of Scottish prehistory. The Great Hall discovered at Carnoustie shows that early Scottish communities were not limited to farming, but built complex social structures through unity. According to insiders, the finds point toward communal feasting, ritual gatherings, and ceremonies that bound people together in shared identity. The social significance of such a space cannot be overstated. Early Neolithic communities in Scotland were the first to transition from mobile lifestyles to farming and permanent settlement. In that context, a hall of this magnitude reflects a community grappling with new forms of cooperation. Farmers needed to coordinate planting, harvesting, and the defense of their food stores. They also needed places to negotiate alliances, resolve disputes, and celebrate milestones. The Carnoustie Hall may have served all of these functions. The finds from the site also highlight a remarkable level of connection to the wider world. Among the artifacts were tools and objects made from materials not native to Angus. Pitch stone, a volcanic glass found on the Isle of Arran, and smoky quartz known from more distant regions were recovered at the site. Their presence indicates long-distance networks of exchange. People in Carney were not living in isolation. They were part of webs that stretched across Scotland and perhaps beyond, carrying not only objects but ideas, traditions, and innovations. This is where the comparison to other major Neolithic sites becomes important. In Orkney, far to the north, lies the Ness of Broadgar, a vast complex of stone buildings and ceremonial structures that flourished a millennium later. Scholars like Nick Card, who has directed excavations at the Ness, often describe it as a center of ritual and community life in the later Neolithic. The Carnwy Hall wall timber and far earlier shows that the roots of such monumental architecture were already present on the Scottish mainland. The parallel is striking at both sites. The emphasis was not simply on survival but on creating spaces where people came together. In case 2, large stone halls and chambered cairns point to traditions of communal architecture. Carnoustie now joins that conversation, demonstrating that the impulse to build big was widespread across Scotland. These discoveries challenge older views of early Neolithic Scotland as a land of small scattered farming groups. Instead, they suggest communities that were socially complex, capable of mobilizing resources for projects that went far beyond individual households. Building such a hall would have required planning, leadership, and cooperation across extended families or even entire clans. That level of organization implies hierarchies or at least influential leaders guiding people toward collective goals. By placing Carnwy alongside Orkney's monumental complexes, archaeologists can now trace a broader trajectory of social